Hello, and thank you for joining me on the Behind the Events podcast, where we speak to industry leaders about the tools and tactics behind their events business, from trade shows and exhibitions to conferences, parties, and more. My guest today is Connor Vickery, and today's episode will be a primer on sponsorship sales for events. Connor has held several senior sales roles across organizations ranging from the Institution of Civil Engineers, InfoSec Europe, owned by Reed Exhibitions, and more recently with Clarion Events, has worked on Insurance Technology Connect Europe, Digital Transformation Expo, and DSEI, Defense and Security Equipment International. Connor has built a career around event sales, and in this episode, he walks us through the hard-earned lessons he has taken in over the last 10 years. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do as well. Let's get into it. Connor, thanks for making time for the show today. I guess we'll get straight into it. So typically when I talk to people who have built their career in sales, there's always an origin story regarding the passion that they developed for that vocation, right? They see it as more of a vocation than a job very often. I'm wondering, what is the origin story behind your sales and business development practice? What is it that you love about it the most?
Well, the origin story is I was broke and I needed a way to make money. And I read a book by uh, Richard Kiyosaki called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he is a sort of self-help guru. And in the book, his story is that he was in the Vietnam War, he was in the Marines, and he left and he was also dead broke and he got good advice from his rich dad, and the advice was go into sales. So I thought, look, I am dead broke, I didn't have many prospects. I took the first sales job I got, which was at a contract publisher, a very great company. I'm still in touch with the managers and the founder of that company today, and I just took it from there and I ended up in events. So that's my sort of villain origin story, if so to speak.
Interesting. I'm wondering, it seems to be the case that your kind of career mirrors the history of the industry itself in terms of going from contract publishing to events. I'm wondering, could you tell both of those stories? One, your kind of career history, and then two, the story of the industry itself and how it evolves from contract publishing to events today.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up because before going into sales, my degree and my interests were always in books and publishing, and that's what led to my interest of joining a publisher for my first sales job. And the events industry, I mean, I've been in it 10 years, but there are people that have been in it a lot longer. But I've seen the sort of end of the British industry of publishing. There are many empires like the Felix Dennis's publishing empire. You know, there are fantastic journalistic outputs such as the Telegraph, the Guardian. You also have magazines that were founded by companies like RBI, such as Farmers Weekly. That back in the day, these were empires. Haymarket Media is another great example of a media empire which began in publishing, whether that be in magazines or it could be traditional publishing or broadsheet publishing. And I joined SJH Group, which was a contract publisher. And a contract publisher is someone that, let's say they're speaking to an association. It could be an association, let's say it's the Rolls-Royce Car Owners Club, and you, on behalf of your company, you create a publication and you can sell editorial in that publication, and that's how you generate the money. But as the internet has completely revolutionized business in general, actual print publications, there's not as much money in it nowadays. So companies had to pivot. A really good example, another company I work for is Relics. Relics is a FTSE 20 company, multi-billion dollar company a year. Initially, Relics owned RBI, which is Reed Business Information, which was actually a publisher. They published magazines like Farmers Weekly. But because of the because of the revolution of the internet, they had to pivot. And RBI now, 80% of their income actually comes from data analytics, whereas pre 2008, 80% of the money came from print publication. Another way Relics is diversified away from print publications is through events, which is what the Reed Exhibitions arms of the Relics Group, which is 13% of Relics's income, cash income. So my career was starting at a contract publisher, and then they tried to pivot out of events, and I helped found one of the events, which was a civil engineering Confex. I sort of helped them pivot out of publishing into that sphere, and then I got headhunted into Reed Exhibitions, and now I work at Clarion Events. So my career was at the very end of that uh, British bastion of industry, which is publishing. I've diversified into the events arms, but it mirrors something that in Britain we do brilliantly, which is media, and it's something I wanted to talk about on this podcast. It's not an industry that people realise that we're so good at. It's one of those industries that Britain has some of the world leading companies in, and that's because of our history of these publishing empires, which were and still are today fantastic companies. So that is my career, and the sort of the growth of the British and worldwide trade fair, confex, exhibition industry.
Interesting. So you use the word confex there, trade show, and then conference. What is the kind of difference between those three things for an outsider who's just learning about the industry right now? And how does that difference kind of play out in terms of the sales and the structure of these events?
So the easiest way to think about it is, let's take an event everyone would know, Comic Con. Comic Con was obviously founded as a US company, but there is a London Comic Con which I didn't directly sell on, but I've worked at Reed Exhibitions and Reed Pop on that event. If you attended Comic Con, it's free for you to attend. So if I wanted to get a ticket, it's free to me to attend. The people that pay are the sponsors, the people that have stands at the exhibition. They pay a certain amount of money with the hope of generating an ROI to sell some of their goods and wares at the event. That is an expo model. There's a completely different model, which is a conference model. A conference model is where I would have to pay a certain amount of money, let's say £1,000 to attend. And the reason I would do that is because as a visitor, I would learn a lot about my industry at that event. Now, there is also something called a confex, which is a mixture of the both, where people pay for tickets, but visitors, pay for tickets, but you will also get sponsors that also sell their wares and generate a return. A really good example of that might be a show like ITC, InsurTech Connect. There are some great examples in the UK of confexes as well. And then trade shows encompass companies that run either or both. So trade shows is an umbrella term, and then you can get the technical terms underneath, which is conferences, which has the business model of getting people to pay for tickets. Expo, where it's free for people to attend, where the sponsors are, where the cash is generated. And then there are shows in between. A good example is London Book Fair, which is a sort of mix in between where people have to pay to attend, but it's only a nominal amount. It was only £20 when I was working on London Book Fair. But then you also get sponsors, the people that actually exhibit at the event. So I hope that answers your question, but it is a bit of a technical sort of jargon, but it's mainly about where you're generating the cash. That's where the technicalities come in.
Interesting. Are there any meaningful differences in the team structures between the team that decides to run a conference versus a convex or a exhibition?
The focus in a conference and in Confex is the quality of the content has to be absolutely fantastic, because that's why people are attending. A really good example is InsurTech Connect. InsurTech Connect is a portfolio of a subsidiary of FinTech is InsurTech, the technology behind insurance. The most important thing is driving quality people to the event, whether that be visitors paying for tickets or whether it be driving visitors so that sponsors and exhibitors can speak to that audience. They go because of the quality of the content. So the job of the salesperson when you are on a conference is to guard the quality of that content. If I'm an event salesperson, and if I sell a package to a company and it includes a speaking slot or a panel discussion or a fireside chat or a breakout chat, however you want to term it, I have to make sure that the person that company puts on that stand is a certain seniority and that the quality of the content is up to a certain standard. Because if it lapses and if it's not at a certain point, word will spread and then you won't have the quality of an event in order to attract the right audience. An expo model, the it for example, another show I worked on was InfoSec Europe. It did have conference and theaters and speaking slots attached to it, but the focus is on driving quality visitors to the stand. So as a salesperson, it's more about talking to sponsors about what their strategy is. Are they relying on passing footfall of people that haven't heard about their brand before? Are they trying to get eyeballs on their logos? People, there's sort of three categories of buyer: a buyer that has never heard of you before, a buyer that may know your brand but hasn't had a proper face-to-face conversation yet and is just researching. They might want to look at a talk that you're putting on, but they're not actively participating in the buying process. And then there are buyers that know your brand and are researching with the possibility of buying. So in terms of my job, the sponsorship sales person, you have to either have a focus on guarding the content or making sure that you really delve into what the strategy of the exhibitor is. So I hope that answers your question. Again, it can get quite technical. And another funny anecdote is you get kind of, I'd say, slight power struggles, I think is a fair term to phrase it. In expos, ops is super important because you're building sometimes double-decker stands. You arrive there on the day. There are forklift trucks. There are people in UV jackets shouting, making sure that the event is built in time. So in Expo, the ops team can sometimes take over, and then on the content with conferences, sometimes the content team are very adamant that you must protect the quality of the content, which I completely understand. But there are differences in terms of inter-team dynamics. Let's leave it there. I think is probably for the best.
Well, I actually look forward to digging into that perhaps later. I'm
Yeah,
thinking
fair enough.
before moving into what I hope ends up being a sort of 101 slash masterclass slash walkthrough of the sales function and how a salesperson at these events can think about enacting their craft. Before doing that, I'd like to ask one final question on, I guess, events law, given that we've both been nerding out about the different types of events and the specific stories behind them. Is there one particular event that you think is illustrative of like the unique dynamics within this industry that you could kind of walk us through the kind of origins of that event or kind of like some quirk about that event in some capacity?
Yeah, there are a couple. I mean, my expertise is not in founding events. To go from 0 to 1 is a really tough skill. I have a couple of friends that are in event startups, and there's a whole industry now of event people that are specifically fantastic at founding events. That's not my expertise. My expertise is mid to large events that are pivoting from expos into a more complex model. We did that on InfoSec Europe. I'm doing it on shows I'm working on now at Clarion Events. That's sort of where my pocket is. But there are stories about a great example is Aircraft Interiors Expo, AIX, which was founded by a guy called Tony Robinson, who founded a company called UKIP, which is not a name that many people would want to name their company, but he named it before the UK Independence Party. And I actually lived in the town that UKIP had their office, and I'd regularly see people chucking eggs, chucking paint at the front of this poor guy's office, and they had to put a sign up saying, "We're not a political party, we're an event company, please leave us alone." Anyway, I know the sales guy was one of Tony's first hires. He's retired now, he's off in the Bahamas. Happy for him. Shows how much money you can make if you get in the right places and events. But him and Tony founded this event called Aircraft Interiors Expo. Now you might think, how much money really? Surely there's like five. No, it's an enormous industry, and Aircraft Interiors Expo is one of the diamonds of the Reed exhibitions, because Reed exhibitions bought it off UKIP, which is now UKNI, which has just been sold to Closer Still. That is one of the diamonds of the Reed exhibitions B2B portfolio, and it was founded in a little corner office in Dorking. Another one would be much more of an absolute smashing success. I'm slightly biased because I worked on it, but InsurTech Connect ITC, which is a real success because, again, like AIX, it's hyper focused on the audience and the niche that it's serving. The story of how ITC was founded was that the founder, that I won't mention him, you can have a look at who the founder is. He had a chat with a couple of people at another big fintech event. I won't say the name of the fintech event. And they were saying, look, we're actually not in fintech, we're in insurtech, and we're not really being serviced by this big fintech event. Can you do anything about it? So the founder launched InsurTech Connect, which is focused on a smaller niche like AIX. And ITC it's won awards, and it's one of the fastest growing individual trade shows on the planet, and the portfolio is growing from strength to strength. And my job was to expand it into Europe, which I did in 2023 with our launch in Barcelona. And then we also ran an event in Munich. And then this year, we ran an event in Amsterdam in June this year. So AIX and ITC are fantastic case studies. If you're studying events, or if you really want to nerd out on event law, AIX, ITC, can't go wrong with it.
So, well, I look forward to digging deeper on that. Hopefully, we can have a longer conversation at another point on those events as well.
I can talk about events all day. I'm a complete event nerd.
Oh yeah. Okay, awesome. So moving on, let's focus very specifically on the kind of meat and potatoes, the functionality that's oriented around kind of sales and the practice there. So perhaps we'll
Yes.
start with
Again, love talking about sales. Let's do it.
hell yeah. So we'll start with the bigger picture here, I guess, which is, could you walk us through the A to Z of the sales function within the events industry, and what would you say the kind of moving parts are that one wants to kind of grasp mastery over as you're thinking about kind of the function from that perspective?
So my first job in contract publishing, there was a heavy focus on cold calling, because that was back in 2013, when cold calling, you could call people. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, people saying cold calling is dead. I don't believe that at all, but it was. I can tell you, 10 years ago, it was easier to get through to a decision maker. That's backed by research saying that the number of touch points and the number of times you need to attempt to get through to a contact has doubled over the last 10 years, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was higher. But that my original sort of job was in you could say editorial sales, or contract publishing sales, and that has stood me in really good stead for the job of being an event salesperson. I have friends that are in tech sales, and the tech sales structure is very structured in terms of their sales process. You have an SDR, an AE. In your first couple of years, you're not even closing deals. You're setting up deals for your account executive. In events, you join and you're doing the whole job A to Z from day one. So in my first job at SJH Group, but also at Reed Exhibitions and now at Clarion Events, when you get a sales exec, you are sourcing your own leads, you are prospecting your own leads, you are doing the initial call, the discovery call, you're following up with a proposal, you are going through trying to close them, get the signature. You are then at that point sometimes talking with their legal department about red lines. You're talking to your legal department about what changes you can make to the contract. You then close the deal. You do the customer management before the event. You sometimes do a pre-book or a rebook on site, or a post-booking campaign. And you're looking after that client for multiple years if you're a sales exec or a sales manager. So you do everything from A to Z as an event salesperson, and that's why I really enjoy the job, because it can be extremely stressful, especially when things go wrong. But everything from sourcing your own prospects to, sometimes I'm doing the job of a lawyer. Obviously, I have to consult with my legal department, but I'm reading contracts with clients and arguing, small red lines about whether or not they can bring electricity to the event, excuse me, or something like that. So, in order to learn that craft, you are chucked in at the deep end almost immediately, and you learn on the job, much like a lot of sales jobs. I'm happy to go into the details of parts of that, but in event sales, you're chucked in the deep end. It's very high pace. It can be extremely stressful. If you're lucky, you get to travel a lot, but that means you're doing calls at the airport, at the Pret a Manger in Heathrow at 6:30, and then you get on a flight. You fly to Vegas, and then you're doing meetings all day. You're jet lagged. You're absolutely knackered. You're on 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 coffees a day. But the perks are that you get to travel around the world, and it's fun. That's that. That's the perks.
Exhilarating, even. I'd imagine you get to interact also with what seems to be the kind of uh, genuine people at the center of their respective industries as well, given that you guys are kind of coordinating every single participant within that industry, and you have something to give them, which is access to kind of key resources within those events as well, right?
That's why I like the job of sales, because I wake up every day and my job is to call people. Now, sometimes they're a bit annoyed that I'm calling them, fair enough, but my job is to call them and go, how can I help you today? You have marketing goals over the next 6, 12, 18 months. How can I hit you? How can I help you hit those goals? I'm not going to hit you. Sorry. How am I going to help you hit those goals? And that's what I love about sales. And with event sales, if you get it right, I've had clients that double, triple, they've done IPOs after the success of an event that I talked them into. I've had that experience before, and it's really fulfilling. It's great to talk to a client afterwards and they say, we closed a £25 million deal because of this event. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
that's what I really, really enjoy about it.
that's such a great point. When you mentioned that number there, 25 million or several million or whatever it is, um, the especially for it seems to be the case these trade shows where, for example, aircraft interiors, right? You're looking at these contracts that can be massive, and the only way for someone to discover that company or to cement the decision to purchase those large contracts is being in person at an event that's been constructed in the way that you have kind of described. So it is very high stakes in that sense. Um,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we could narrow down, and if you could help us understand both the basics and then like what you believe the kind of scaffolding towards mastery is for the sub parts of the sales role itself. So, for example, you spoke about the fact that it's a 360 role in the events industry, and hopefully this can be useful to say someone who's just starting out in a role within the industry right now. So, let's say, for example, we're thinking about prospecting, i.e., finding potential sponsors or kind of qualifying them. What is your kind of thought on the playbook for that?
So I actually just did a post on LinkedIn about there are probably about a good dozen ways in order to get leads. Now, I in event sales there are two categories. There are delegate sales, people, for example, if you're putting on a conference and tickets are £1,000, there are delegate sales specialists that are really good at reaching out to 400, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 in some cases contacts and individually selling them tickets to an event. That's not my speciality. I'm not a delegate sales specialist. My speciality is sponsorship, so B2B selling, sponsorship of large ticket packages to confexes. And the way that I work is to immerse myself in any industry I'm working in. So before ITC, I was working on InfoSec Europe, which is a cybersecurity event. And in order to immerse myself in the industry, I actually did CompTIA A plus, Net plus, and Sec plus, which are IT certificates. But in answer to your question, beyond just putting yourself into the industry, in order to prospect, I have a few tips. A really good one is go onto Google and set up pings or set up alerts for certain keywords in your industry. So you can go onto Google and say, ping me every time cyber comes up in the news or cybersecurity. Every day I get an email through from Google saying these are the companies that have been bought or IPO'd, or these are the companies that have received funding from venture capital firms, or these are companies that have closed large deals in cybersecurity. So that's a really easy one to do. Another thing is to follow the venture capital firms in your industry. So, for example, in InsurTech, there are specialist VC firms whose job it is to look into that market. If you follow them on LinkedIn, they have a weekly report of the companies that have received funding. Funnily enough, if a company receives £25 million funding, you can probably call them up and be assured that they might have some money for sponsorship. Another thing we used to do back in the contract publishing days is we would buy industry magazines. We would subscribe to industry magazines. I've been involved in various different verticals, but let's say InfoSec Europe, it actually had its own magazine, InfoSec magazine, but you'd have competitor magazines and you could look through the magazine and see the companies that were either talked about in editorials or they'd actually taken out advertising. Another one is to go to competitor events and networking events. But if you wanted the one thing to do if you're an event salesperson is to actually be a nerd about your industry. Really, don't think of yourself as an event person. Think of yourself as, if you're in InfoSec Europe, for example, think of yourself as a cybersecurity person that happens to run events. That's the one key I found, because people sense that when you're calling them and you're asking them, how's business been? They can tell if you're not being truthful. They can tell if you don't really care. But if you're actually going, how's business going? Oh, I know that, let's say, Darktrace IPO'd recently, or you know about their day-to-day tasks, you know about the customers they're trying to sell to, you know about their industry, that goes a long way of building trust.
Interesting. It goes to, I think, there's this book called The Challenger Sale, which talks about this idea of kind of more consultative sales, where you can genuinely bring a level of kind of insight and expertise that they themselves don't have on their own business, because obviously they're busy doing other stuff within the business, and so you can bring that additional perspective. I'm wondering, how does that lead to, I guess, and what is kind of your 101 on the next part of the sales process, which I guess in this case would be kind of qualifying and understanding, is this person slash firm a match? Is this the person that fits within the firm in terms of decision making, and thinking about the kind of budget and matching them with a given product that fits their needs?
That's a good question. Well, to go back to what you said before, I have had people on the other end of the phone and they go, I want to put 80% of my marketing budget with you. At that point, I'm not a salesperson, I'm their contracted marketing person. And that's the ideal scenario. I don't want to come to a company and they just see me as some salesperson trying to flog some square meterage. That's not how you want to come across. You want to come across as a consultant. You want to come across as a sort of outsourced marketing person that is going to help them meet the right audience. Now, in answer to your question, how do you qualify the right decision maker? How do you qualify the decision maker? Sometimes you cannot get through to the decision maker. That's especially true for massive enterprise companies. It's very difficult to call up and get through to the CEO of Salesforce. Good luck trying that. Um, but when I was working on the contract publishing side of things, I was calling construction companies, and there were some very small to medium-sized architecture firms, construction companies, where you could call the office and you can get through to the CEO. So it depends on the size of the company. And with bigger companies, you normally have more decision makers. You are usually going to be speaking to a marketing manager, marketing director, who would then report back internally and present your proposal. So that completely changes the conversation. And there's a very well-known acronym in sales, BANT. You need to identify where the budget is held, what the authority is, and what the process is, and the timeline of that decision-making process. So if I'm speaking to a very small company and I can call and get through to the CEO, you don't want to patronize him or her and say, do you need to talk to anyone else internally? They might need to go to an investor, they might need to go to the board, but when you send them a proposal, you have to get to the point. These are very busy individuals. I normally put everything in the email, don't attach a PDF, don't attach 5 million different links. Put it all into one email. This is the proposal, this is the price, to the point. Whereas if you're pitching a much larger company, and these are all generalities, I'm not saying these are hard and fast rules, but if you're talking to a much larger company, you might be speaking to a marketing exec, marketing manager, and they say, look, I need to present your proposal internally. I need you to include this information so that when I have it on the presentation in the boardroom, I can say confidently, this is the ROA I'm expecting on this event. In that case, you need to have a well put together proposal with initially a couple of slides on why I'm putting this proposal together. What are the goals that I've identified you are trying to achieve? How are we going to help you achieve those goals? This is the package I would recommend. Again, going with that consultative approach, and then finishing on the next plan of when are we going to get back in touch? What is an agreed plan on? It's a much more structured sales approach. So it depends on the size of company you're speaking to. It also depends on the industry. When I was working in civil engineering and construction, these guys and gals, they're very direct, very to the point. There's not a lot of small talk. Whereas when I was talking in cybersecurity, these are, again, generalities. I found that the sort of vibe of the industry was a lot more analytical. There was a lot more decision makers. The company sizes were also enormous. Some of these were US tech companies. So it really depends on the size of the company and also the industry you're in.
Interesting. And in terms of kind of matching one, you're kind of qualifying, trying to understand is the right person to speak to. On the other hand, you have this kind of persuasion element to the conversation, right? Where you are selling the conference slash exhibition, and trying to continue the conversation and ensure that they're kind of aligned on that. How do you kind of match those two things, and what does the kind of persuasive argument look like, and how does that vary depending on kind of like the needs? What does that kind of segmentation and process look like there?
You know what? Sometimes yeah, that's a really good question. It reminds me of, I was working on a show recently. I'm not going to say the show. I don't want to get in trouble here. And I called up this, and we were 3 weeks out from the event, and I called up this bloke, and he really didn't want to take my call. It's a cold call, completely cold call. Never spoken before, and I go, let's call him Bob. I go, Bob, I'm in this sort of polite mode, opening a cold call that I normally do, but it very quickly got down to what is the price, okay? Forget the politeness, yeah, forget this sort of human-to-human interaction. What is the price? It was what I would call a very transactional sell. And the reason that is, it was quite a small amount. Off the top of my head, it was £5,000. Very small sale amount. So that you can have that transactional sales in events. Whereas last year, I'm not going to say the event and I'm not going to say the company name, but let's just say it was a giant consultancy firm, and the package was north of $150,000. That sales conversation, much more consultative. At that point, you are a marketing sort of advisor in that sense. You're really digging deep into what is your strategy. You get into things such as, are you opening another office? What is the seniority level of the audience you're trying to reach? What does success look like to you in an event? Let's plan the metrics that we're trying to hit. Are you trying to be seen as a thought leader in the industry? Are you trying to get your brand in front of as many eyeballs as possible? Do you want one-to-one meetings before? So in answer to your question, that sales conversation, I suppose, honestly, the answer to all your questions is always going to be, it depends. But in this case, it depends on the size of the transaction. And there's a really good book called Spin Selling, which delves into this. A lot of people don't agree with the spin selling technique, but one of the main principles of that spin selling technique is that above and it obviously depends on the individual. One of the anecdotes it says in spin selling is when you go into uh, a petrol station, you're not going to haggle over a bit of gum or buying a little stick of gum because it's not a huge investment for you. That's a transactional sell, buy one, get one free. Whereas if you are going to go in and buy a car, because of the size of the value, there has to be a much more sophisticated sales approach. So it can change depending on the industry. For example, some industries, £50,000 is a huge amount of money, whereas there are some industries where £50,000 is a drop in the ocean. So it depends on the industry you're in and the amount of cash sloshing about in that industry. Hope that answers your question. It's mainly about the investment that you have to get out of them, and you have to change your sales approach depending on. But again, that's what I love about event sales. You go from transactional sales, look, mate, what's the price? Having a bit of a conversation about that, all the way up to 80% of my marketing budget is with you. We need to get this right.
Highly,
That's the great thing about event sales.
highly dexterous. I'm wondering if we could narrow down or zoom in on the budget component and how that differs across industries. So, what are some examples where, just at a high level, I guess, the industry dynamic is such that there's very significant budgets that are available for this genre of marketing versus not? Like, what kind of dictates that? Is it the size of the firm itself, or is it a kind of certain industry structure question? What is it that kind of like dictates whether they're looser with, oh, we're going to spend money in this channel or not, as it relates to, I guess, trade shows and events? And also, like, how does that work when you kind of think about kind of contract publishing and media as well, and intersecting across those two?
That's a good question. I noticed during the pandemic, everyone thought events were dead. Everyone said, you know what? This is a sign. This is a sign of how business is going to be. Your job's going to be completely pointless in a couple of years. I was even speaking to very angry clients during that time, which were kind of annoyed that I was try selling event space during a pandemic. Yeah. In 30, 40 years time, when if I've got young people or kids or whoever moaning at me, I'm going to be like, you just try selling events during a pandemic. All right. That is a tough job. But yeah, the reason I bring that up is because everyone pivoted completely. All of the budgets went from physical events to digital. Everything went into digital. And you see that a lot either by as a new CEO coming in, some of them just decide, oh, trade shows don't work. We're going to put everything into digital. But I have noticed that after the pandemic, we have proved ourselves to be invaluable. That it's completely pivoted the other way. Now, obviously, there are digital products which have great ROI, or some companies really enjoy. Some of them can be webinars, can have some really fantastic products for clients. Some of it can be hosted white papers or online magazines, for example. And there are still print publications which have a great reach, but there is no substitute for a face-to-face meeting. There is no substitute for meeting people face-to-face and actually pressing the flesh and having a conversation there and then. So as much as it changes on the whims of CEOs and it changes on the whims of, not on the whims, but on the research of particular companies, the pandemic has proved undoubtedly. I don't think anyone would disagree with this now, just because I've spoken with many clients that have tried it. So many clients tried pivoting all their spending to digital, and it's proven. We had a big experiment where no one met each other, and I think we can all agree that actually meeting face to face is very productive. Not all the time. I completely understand that events still absolutely need to prove their value on an event to event basis. But in answer to your question, I've seen everyone flood back to events after the pandemic. It was sorely needed.
Awesome. So I guess the kind of logical follow up there is, well, actually, there's two directions. I'll kind of go with the more logical one, and then I'll share the other one afterwards. Um, in terms of delivering ROI and going from, okay, we kind of understand what the customer's needs are, right? Now we have got a story that shows that the base product that we have here is something that enables them to achieve it, right? There is some sort of match in terms of audience, there's some match in terms of mandates and decision makers that are going to be available. What does the kind of next step look like in terms of actually delivering and measuring that ROI and that kind of post-client, renewal process, ensuring that they're kind of satisfied? What does that kind of like whole life cycle kind of look like, and what are some tips for thinking about that more effectively?
The best thing to do is to make sure that you identify really early on what their strategy is and what success looks like to them. A way I've always been taught it, and a way that multiple event companies look at, is there are three different buckets of objectives that your client is most probably going to need. One is brand awareness, which is the stage that there are people at the event that have no idea who you are, and you need to introduce them initially to your brand. The second one is thought leadership, where instead of people not knowing your brand, they know about your brand, but you need to position yourself as different to your competitors, which is normally done by having some sort of thought leadership presentation, so to speak. And just to go back to brand awareness, that's normally getting your logo and brand in front of people. So there's brand awareness, thought leadership, and then there's the actual face-to-face, trying to identify, okay, those are the two objectives you have. The third objective is clients know who you are, that they have seen that you prove your value. Now they actually want to meet you, and they actually want to have a conversation where they're in a position to possibly buy from you. So you have to identify where in the life cycle their customers are. So you have to speak to either the CEO, the marketing director, whoever it is at that company, and really dig into, okay, do your customers know who you are? They don't. Okay, let's solve that problem. They do know who you are, but you haven't positioned yourself as a thought leader in the space. Or they know exactly who you are. We need to get as many people and as many meetings face to face so that you are there signing contracts on the dotted line at the event. That's the most important thing to understand, is, do they know that? So many customers I speak to don't know that, and that's my job to say to them, I don't think our audience knows you, and the reason I know that is because they've told me they don't know who you are. That is where that consultative process comes in. I know the market sometimes better than half the marketing people I'm speaking to. I'm telling you, they don't know who you are. So that's the number one thing: identify where their customers are in the buying journey of their product. And then you have to agree on, what does success look like to you? If it's brand awareness, is success, let's say I'm speaking to a marketing exec, is success you're walking in with your CEO to Excel, for example, and you see your company name, bam, right there in the entrance, and the CEO turns to the marketing exec and goes, well done. Sometimes it's an ego-driven thing of the marketing exec or the marketing manager going, I need to look good in front of my CEO, and that is my job. Sometimes I'm not dealing with just whether or not they're going to do business. Sometimes I have to make other people look good, or I have to. It's not necessarily return on the number of contracts done on the day. It's about being seen as the first company to be seen when you walk into Excel. So that's the main thing: identifying where their customers on their buying journey, what is success going to look like to them, and then delivering that. And then afterwards, sometimes I get shouted at. Sometimes we don't hit the mark. I'm not going to say specifics, but there have been times when I've got stuff wrong. Other people have made mistakes. There's always problems on site. Sometimes a supplier breaks something. Sometimes a TV doesn't work. Sometimes people don't show up on time. You have to take the complaint. Don't get defensive. Don't get emotional. Take what they're saying, fix it, and then afterwards take the feedback on board and do the best you can to make it better if it's a bad situation, or if it's fantastic, you build upon that. So I think that answers your question about Really, really understanding your client, because a lot of salespeople think it's good enough to know what they do. No, 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 no. You have to know what their customers are thinking of them. That's the sort of inception matrix level of events. Whereas I think a lot of salespeople, they don't need to know the market that well. Whereas event sales, you need to be to the point where you know more about their industry than their marketing manager sometimes. I'm not saying that's always the case. I don't want marketing managers to jump on this and say you don't know what you're talking about. Sometimes that's the case.
Interesting. And before you were talking about, in order to meet those different goals of brand awareness, thought leadership, face to face kind of conversion, there's different products that are crafted as a function of that. Could you walk through like hypothetical examples of what a product looks like in that frame in terms of, I guess, the spectrum of budget, or kind of like how people even frame that? Because it feels like a very kind of, in the same way that when someone sells consulting services, it's very nebulous to a certain degree, right? It's not like a tangible physical thing, although sometimes it is, right? It's like a banner that you're kind of selling, but there's a story behind why that helps you achieve a certain goal. I'm wondering here, could you help us kind of get more granularity as it relates to what is the different types of sponsorship products within these events tend to look like,
Yeah.
to achieve those goals?
I've had some amazing shout out to Bean Consulting, who came into Clarion Events and did this exact exercise. We had a couple of days where we identified the three different objectives, uh, uh, objectives that clients have when they attend event. And what we do and what I like to do is you have an inventory list, and this is a spreadsheet or a smart sheet, however you want to do it. Salespeople need to list out every single item of inventory that you could possibly have at the event. So, for example, it could be hosted buyer sessions, which is another sort of tangent in the event industry, which we haven't spoken about, which means that instead of just having visitors and you just welcome them all generally to the show, you actually you do the scheduling of the meetings and host a buyer session. You have to list out things like space, but it can also be thought leadership packages, which can be a half an hour panel discussion, 5 or 6 people with a moderator on stage talking about a subject that the content team have put together. Everything from when you walk into a venue, you have the prime banners as you walk in, registration sponsor, floor tiles, digital screens with videos of your product, the lanyard sponsor, the badge sponsor. Sometimes people bring their own branded t-shirts. At ITC Vegas, they have a puppy lounge. They have a sponsored puppy lounge where people can go in and pet puppies, and it's sponsored by a company. You have the water
That's
bottle sponsor. You have the coffee. You want to intervene? Now, go on.
that's unbelievable. That's
I
what
wish we could do it in the UK, but we're not allowed to do it in the UK. But it's adorable, adorable.
that to me, you're talking about Inception. That's like the height of it in terms of I think I remember reading about how oxytocin, if I'm not mistaken, kind of when it gets released, you feel more kind of proclivity towards persuasion and love, right? And people jokes about, oh, in retail stores, next thing you know, they're going to start spraying oxytocin in the air. This is the actual equivalent of that, and that's like to me insane. Like that definitely must be closing a lot of strong relationships leading to high contract values and whatnot. For
Well, I
these
mean,
businesses.
all right, for example, ITC Vegas, they had, I mean, Earth, Wind, and Fire, there's only Earth left. Sorry, the rest of them are dead. But
Mhm.
the closing party of ITC Vegas, we were in the Mandalay Bay beach, exclusive. We watched Earth, Wind, and Fire. Everyone else had cabanas behind us, sponsored cabanas. There's like sponsored balloons that we're all chucking around after the event. Events, if it's done right, it's a party. My job sometimes is to travel around the world partying with clients. It's amazing. But you have to get down to the brass tacks. And going back to your question, uh, to sort of succinctly put it, you need to know every single piece of inventory, and you need to know in your head and pair it with, okay, that would work if a client wanted brand awareness. That would be the best package if they wanted to be the thought leader, or that would be a really good package if they wanted face-to-face interactions. A really good example is being the knowledge partner or the headline sponsor of a Confex event. That hits all three of the points. You have your logo next to the actual name of the event. your logo is seen by everyone at that point. You also have the keynote session at the start of the event. You open the event, you're really seen as the thought leader, and usually you have a massive stand where you can schedule meetings on the event. But in answer to your question, the salesperson must know the inventory back to front, upside down, inside out, and you must be able to pair the goals of the client to pieces of inventory. And then your job is to recommend, okay, I've heard what your marketing goals are for the next 18 months. This is what I'd recommend.
Okay, awesome. And I guess the final part of this that I'm very, very curious about as it relates to the kind of full life cycle of sales for an event is closing and dealing with objections and that kind of broader negotiation that perhaps happens afterwards. So those are three different things. I'm curious as to what the kind of basics of that look like, and then what kind of like improving the scaffolding of that skill / what tips you have on those three areas, maybe.
Yeah. And as you get, so I've been in, sales 11 years at this point. And when you're first starting out, your initial problem is your own fear. The initial problem is the fear of cold calling, the fear of doing everything for the first time. But once you get, and the real problem with being scared is impact performance. I had a great coach, a guy that actually was an expert in fear technology, and he had a great saying that there is a correlation between how scared you are, how much fear you have, and its impact on performance. The more fearful you are, it will impact your performance. And that's the number one thing salespeople struggle with at first, this fear impacting performance. And you just have to push through the fear. But as you get past that fear, what you go from is hearing the client. Clients say things and you think you're listening, you're not, you're just hearing it. As you get better and better and better at sales, you're not just hearing people, it's the skill of properly listening. So I had a client today say, we can't do the event. Sorry, we're going to do it we might make a decision in 4 months. And I got on the phone with him. I said, look, can you just explain to me why, what's the reason? And it was very complicated. It's partly to do with the fact they're changing the company structure. They're no longer going to be a limited company, and they're going to be under an umbrella. I, as a junior sales exec, I would have heard that, and then I might have gone, oh, well, that's it. I can't do anything more about it. But a more experienced sales exec, you're not just hearing people, you actually are listening and you're understanding the subtext of what he's saying. What he was really saying is, I'm getting caught in between a rock and a hard place of lawyers and senior management. I need you to solve one of my problems, which was a payment plan. But obviously, if I just heard his words, I wouldn't have got to the bottom of that. But understanding people and what they're actually saying to you on a human level, that is what you start getting to as you're a better and better and better salesperson. It goes back to my example of when a marketing manager is saying we need brand awareness. Are they actually saying that, or do they really want to look good in front of their boss? That's the sort of next level of understanding sales, is not just hearing what people say and understanding the subtext of it. So when a client throws out an objection to you, they might say, oh, you're too expensive. But if you actually listen to them and you actually understand where they're coming from, it might be, look, I've got the money, but I'm a small company. I kind of need to borrow some from the bank. Can you do 10% now and 90%, whenever? But most people, if they're inexperienced salespeople, they just hear, they don't listen. That's the one thing I'd say.
That's incredible. I'm wondering, you've already shared the kind of like high level of a few great examples there. Are there any more examples, or could you go deeper on any of those examples, such that we can really internalize this principle of understanding the subtext, and I guess like improving our pattern recognition as it relates to the subtext of what is being shared with us in those conversations?
Specific examples of subtext. I mean, that's probably the best example I've got, because I think in business we forget, and sales don't forget this. But a lot of people forget that you don't buy products, you buy people. And of course, the product needs to have fantastic ROI, and you need to prove that you're valuable to that company. But in order to be good at sales, you don't necessarily need to be an extrovert. I'm not one of those people that believe salespeople needs to be an extrovert, but you do need to be empathic. You do really need to understand the person you're speaking to is probably extremely stressed. They are under an enormous amount of pressure. They've got this budget and they really need to spend it wisely. And if they're not, they are probably going to be fired. You need to understand and manage that emotional journey for them as much as the monetary journey sometimes. I have had many occasions where people are on the edge of tears speaking to me because I can't get them the location or I can't get them the package that they want. I have had people genuinely sat in front of me, borderline in tears, saying, "Please, please, you need to fix this problem for me." And sometimes I'm more of a therapist than I am a salesperson. So that is probably another really good example. I'm not going to say the show I was on, but I've worked on some diamond events. You know, some of the best events in the industry. People are clamoring to get the right spaces, whether that be right in front of the entrance hall or right next to the puppy lounge. I'm not saying if I ever sold that package or anything like that. But if you're a marketing manager or a marketing exec, or if you're the CEO and you know that you need a certain ROI on this event, or the company goes bust, I need to be able to be empathic towards that. That is part of my job, and it can be really stressful because salespeople are often dumping that emotion onto you. I get a lot of people telling me their life story. I get a lot of people talking to me about their marriages, talking to me about their kids. I am a therapist sometimes more than a salesperson. So I hope that's a few anecdotes for you to sink your teeth into. But I've seen some crazy stuff being an event salesperson.
That's phenomenal. I just want to say what a great quote that is. More a therapist than a salesperson. I mean, that really.
Sometimes I am. And by the way, my mum is a therapist, so she's taught me very well. Actually, you know what? That is genuinely a really good tip for salespeople. Delve into a little bit of therapy, a little bit of how to manage people. I found a really good book on this is Crucial Conversations. Another one is Emotional Intelligence. There are some fantastic books out there about how to improve your emotional intelligence, which aren't sales books. Persuasion is another fantastic book. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Think and Grow Rich. Those sort of books, and Rich Dad Poor Dad, fantastic book for people to. I'm a massive book nerd, by the way, hence why I went into publishing. But learning about how to manage people is invaluable for a salesperson.
Phenomenal. The follow-up question that I had after closing was going to be, what are the right mindsets, attitudes, expectations, and frames for thinking about this genre of sales or sales more broadly? I feel like you've 85% kind of touched upon it, but if you have any additional thoughts on additional mindsets and kind of like that intangible aspect that you think are particularly useful, would love to hear those. If not, I have another follow-up question.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about sales that I think people the problem is that some people just see sales as a job, and I completely understand that not everyone is going to pour a huge amount of their life and investment into a career. Some people prefer to just have jobs, and I completely understand that. But if you really want to push it, and this is what I aspire to be, I'm not saying I'm there yet, but the study of sales is the study of peak performance. That is really what you need to get into, because peak performance, in order to be fantastic at anything, it's about self motivation, how to be a self starter. Another great book is Managing Oneself. I believe it's by Peter Drucker. How to manage yourself, because as a salesperson, sometimes, not always, you are a one-man band business or one lady band, however you want to say it. And you need to learn how to self-motivate peak performance. And the study of that is difficult. The study of that is really, really tricky. And you always fall short. every single day I fall short of where I would want to be. I don't always hit the bullseye, but the act of trying every single day to get closer and closer to your ideal set of beliefs, ideal set of behaviors that come from those beliefs, ideal way to conduct yourself, ideal way of making the right decision, working under pressure, dealing with fear, dealing with anxiety. The study of that is the study of sales and peak performance, and that's what I'm fascinated by, which I think you can probably tell by the number of self-help books I just rattled off in the last 10 minutes. But that if you want to take sales to that next level, you don't have to, but if you really want to take it to that elite level, you have to study peak performance.
Love that. I think I've a book I've really enjoyed recently. There's two books. So one is called Positive Intelligence, and it talks about how you can overcome one kind of sabotaging forces within your brain, and that's kind of negative intelligence, right? For example, judgment, shame, fear, all these things you've kind of mentioned. How can you flesh out your understanding of that? And then two, how do you turn your brain into more of a friend that is helpful in those situations and kind of helps you gain perspective and then orient you in a effective and balanced manner. And I think that's one cool book. Another book is called The Inner Game of Tennis. Again, it talks about that kind of almost doing more by doing less, right? It's like having the version of yourself that may kind of create resistance, understanding that and getting over that. And I think when you spoke about fear, that kind of very much uh, reminded me of that. And I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and one final thing I wanted to say before you sort of wrap up your questions is that another thing that I think is important if anyone wanted to get into event sales is to understand the context of the event industry. And we were talking about this before we started the call. There's a great article in Exhibition News talking about how 6 of the 10 top companies in the event space by turnover are in the UK. I've worked at 2 of them, which are based in Southwest London. But one of the things that really motivates me in this industry is that this is something that we as the British are really, really good at. There are some fantastic events, world-leading events. I could rattle off some names like Reed Exhibitions, Informa, UBM, large companies, but small companies like 19 Group, UK&I, Clarion Events is sort of the mid-level, Easy Fares. Um, uh, there are quite a few I can rattle off. I'm not going to bore everyone, but the reason that I'm really invested in this industry is because how many industries nowadays could you say that Britain really is leading the way in? Not many. I think maybe 50, 60 years ago you could argue finance or you could argue tobacco, but we won't go there. But to this day, there are some fantastic companies and movers and shakers in this field, and I feel like I'm part of an industry that is really blossoming, an industry that is really maturing, and we're. I'm pretty sure most people wouldn't disagree. I think Britain is the best at it. Most of the revenue comes from other countries, but a lot of the companies and a lot of the places where these companies are based is in Britain. So that's something I really enjoy about the event industry, and I think that sense of gratitude of being part of something that we're great at, that's also really helpful to have in my role.
Incredibly exciting. I think you're right. There is definitely a kind of dynamism that exists in that industry in the UK. I know that a lot of the events companies in the UK have been winning mandates in, for example, the Middle East, and they've been buying up companies in India to um, really kind of capitalize on that mastery, so to speak. I think it's very exciting. I think it's a good chance actually to get to the last couple of questions. One of which actually narrows down back to the tactical, and then the other one will kind of like zoom back out to the macro.
Oh
So
yeah,
the
I love it. Love the tactical.
so I was going to the tactical here. In terms of your day to day and week to week, could you walk us through what that actually kind of consists of and how you think about what an effective day looks like in a sales role, and maybe how that differs according to how different days may be shaped, and then how that adds up to kind of like a weekly and kind of monthly rhythm, so we can kind of get a feel for what expectations may look like if one's kind of doing that function effectively.
Really good question. Again, this is all about the study of peak performance. And another guy I love to listen to his content and read his books is Alex Hormozy. He wrote a book called $100 Million Offer, which I'm sure many people know of. And he has a great video, and it's about priorities. You must prioritize the most important tasks, and I call it sacrificing the lamb. At the start of the day, you need to sacrifice the lamb. The one thing you need to do the most important thing you need to do first, which for most salespeople is prospecting. People hate doing it. You hate picking up the phone. You hate cold calling. And that's why that's the first thing you need to do. Now, my job nowadays, I'm not expected so much. I love cold calling. I love that bloke that I called for the event. I called him up and he was like, look, what's the price? And I haggled him for like 2 weeks on price. It was a tiny deal. It was £5,000. That's my favorite deal of the year this year because it was a cold call, and I managed to that really energizes me. I absolutely love that. But it can be anything. Nowadays it might be sending a big long passive aggressive email to someone in finance, maybe something like that. But I do everything on Google Calendar, and on Google Calendar every day I could pull it up for you right now. I have a series of tasks prioritized, 1, 2, 3. I get to my desk, I go onto Google Calendar. I've got a coffee before, but I'm not faffing about having breakfast or chatting to Sandra in finance. Get to my desk. What's number one? Do it. Just start getting through. And sometimes I come in early if I don't want to be disturbed and it's not cold calling, so I have to do it from, or if I'm calling Asia or something like that, I come in early. Prioritizing the tasks and executing. That's the prioritization and focus on execution. Now, again, I've said this, I don't always hit the mark. I'm not a machine. Sometimes I struggle with motivation. Anyone that says they don't struggle with motivation is lying to you. But my system is that I prioritize, it's there on my Google Calendar, and my endeavor is to get through that list every single day. So I'm not focusing on planning. There are other roles and other people that might focus on that more. My belief is that salespeople need to focus on prioritization and execution of those number one roles. So it changes depending on how big of the event I'm working on, what company I'm working on, or my prioritization of the role. But for anyone watching this, you need to put cold calling number one. Prospecting, cold calling number one. Do it before your 9 o'clock meeting. Do it at 8:30. Call people while they're eating their cereal, because just sacrifice the lamb, get it out of the way. And then by the time you do your third call and you've talked to the receptionist a couple of times, then you're in the mood, and then you can go into your meeting, you come out and you're happy to cold call. So that's my study of peak performance 101. Prioritize. And that's what Alex Hormozy talks about in his content, in that there cannot be two priorities. You can't say yes to two things. You say yes to one thing and you prioritize that, and you do it until it's done. So that's how I do it.
Awesome. And how many cold calls do you think the kind of average salesperson should aim to do on a daily basis, or how does one kind of like think about kind of gauging that? And yeah.
My first role, there were days I'd spend 4 hours on the phone, 150, 200 cold calls a day. And by the way, I love this guy. I'm still in touch with this company. This company's completely changed. This was back in the day when you could do this. You can't do this nowadays. Oh, they'll be fine me telling this story. They're a great bunch of guys. I joined and they gave me a stack of paper of companies, and they had phone numbers. And they gave me a phone. I didn't have a computer. I had a phone and a stack of papers with phone numbers and company names.
Mm-hmm.
Said pitch all of them. It was thousands of company names and mobile numbers. I didn't know the name of the decision maker. I didn't know I didn't have any emails. I had nothing. I was calling, and my job was to find out who the decision maker is and pitch them there and then. I didn't have a computer to send a follow-up email.
Mm-hmm.
That was 11 years ago. Nowadays, if you had a sales exec join a company and they didn't get a laptop, they'd throw a hissy fit and they'd quit immediately. But that if you are starting out in sales, that is a great way to learn. And they had fantastic training. There was a script which you had to memorize, and they had if you had got an objection, you did 2 weeks of training where you had a little sticker and you looked, okay, that's a price objection, you would then turn to that objection. You'd have some notes about how to overcome that objection. Now, of course, that was just the first month. You had literally a script and a flip chart of overcoming objections. And then by the third, fourth, fifth month, if you lasted, then I'd done 150 cold calls a day. By that point, I could do the pitch and overcome the objections in my sleep. But when you're first starting out, there is nothing wrong with smashing the phones. That is where you get the most amount of experience and you overcome that fear. But then as you get later on, your role can become a lot more managerial, managing people. It can My job nowadays sometimes is speaking about ops and how we can deliver certain packages. It's much more about strategy. You get away from that cold calling, which I think everyone does as they get more senior and they get older. Um, so yeah, I hope that answers your question. But I sometimes miss those days of drinking, you know, I'd probably say, I don't know, a liter of black coffee a day and smashing 150, 200 calls a day.
If I was having, I'm very sensitive to coffee. So when I have coffee, I think like, if I were to have more than 2 cups, more than a cup, quite frankly, I'd be bouncing up and down, kind of like, like a
I
bomb.
I'm not going to go into it, but I had to go to the doctors because I drank too much coffee. Don't drink too much coffee, guys.
Lesson absorbed, hopefully. Okay, so final question then, zooming out, well, actually, penultimate question, zooming out, is as you kind of think about the future of both B2B events and then also sales as it relates to events, right? We can kind of separate those two, I guess. What do you think are some of the kind of trends, technologies, and patterns that are changing the game over, say, the next decade for these two kind of both industry and function and intersection of industry and function? What are some things you're kind of seeing on the ground right now? What are some challenges that you think will be kind of overcome, but people are kind of taking a look at right now, etc.? Like, what does that kind of macro view that you've kind of created look like?
In terms of the industry, we spoke about this and touched upon it. It's such an exciting time because the events and trade fair industry over the last 10, 20 years has really matured, where you're getting conglomerates like Informa, UBM, Reed Expo, really consolidating smaller events into portfolios and really maturing in how they structure events rather than just looking at them as individual businesses, really trying to structure them into a larger organization. I think that trend is going to continue. It's obviously harder now because of the interest rate environment in terms of getting funding, but there are companies that are overcoming it. For example, BlackRock, this is public information. BlackRock are owners of Clarion Events, and they also own other companies like IDG. And private equity have really perked up to the fact that events, if you get a diamond event, you're making 50-60% profit margins in some case. If you get an event and you manage to pay off your the main cost of an event is the venue. If you manage to get a certain point, you are literally printing money. You're printing profit at that point. If you get a crack team onto an event, so consolidation of events into the larger organizations, which are a lot of them are in the UK, Relics, Informa, UBM, that's going to continue. And going back to what you said previously, you're seeing that in multiple different geographies. For example, the majority of the revenue of Reed Exhibitions is from North America, and they're expanding into India, they're expanding into Africa. That is going to continue because the growth of the UK is not going to be matched by countries like the US, developing economies like India, and then other economies in the Middle East or Far East. That is the industry trend. And by the way, I'm not an expert on this. I'm an event salesperson. There are other people that are much more experienced on this, and there are probably people that you could talk to that are involved in that corporate business development side of things. Not my expertise. Let's get back to what I do know, which is the change of the job. The change of the job that I've noticed is that you can't just rely on smashing the phones like I did 10, 11 years ago. You need to have a much more sophisticated sales process. And there are things which I believe are in their infancy. I mean, we met because I now have 10,000 LinkedIn followers because I really prioritize social media in terms of growing my own audience, and I sell through LinkedIn. For example, I post on LinkedIn, I then go through my analytics on LinkedIn and I prospect using the people that engage with my data. I had a £10,000 deal that came in January, not the biggest deal in the world, but it came because I identified someone that had engaged with my content on LinkedIn. That is a complete change from the sales role if you were to look at it 10, 15 years ago. That's bordering on a marketing sales hybrid role, and that trend I believe is going to continue. You're going to get a lot more people on social media who are a blend of event directors, founders, salespeople, and marketing. You have to be a lot more sophisticated in your understanding of how to market not just the event and not just speak to a person at sales capacity, but also market yourself on social media. Another thing I've noticed is that salespeople are opening on LinkedIn not with text, not with a phone call. They're doing it over voice notes and they're doing it over video, which is a SaaS thing, but event salespeople and recruiters I've noticed are catching on to that. So the role is and the problem is with event sales is you can never drop the fundamentals. You still need to be cold calling, you still need to be doing emails, still keeping on top of all your admin in that sense, but you need to then develop these new skills, using ChatGPT in order to research into your industry, using AI in order to understand who your next prospects can be, using AI to make an email sequence, A/B testing your email sequences, all of this great stuff. You need to have the basics, which all salespeople, event salespeople have always had to do. But then you've got this whole new suite of skills, which I'm trying to learn, which I can only see that trend continuing.
Phenomenal. Cool. So we'll get to the final two questions. I know I've said that a couple of times. I promise we're getting to.
No, don't worry, mate. I could talk about this all evening. I could talk about event sales all evening.
It's I'm okay. So penultimate question here is one that I'm actually just stealing from one of my favorite podcasts called Invest Like the Best, and it is a kind of ode to gratitude. Right. The question is, what is something that someone else has done for you personally or within the industry that has kind of like made you grateful throughout your kind of career?
I mean, honestly, the highlight, I've had so many highlights. And I mean, for example, last year, I went to Barcelona, Amsterdam, Vegas, Miami, Bogota, Colombia. I went to Singapore. This year, I went to Paris. Next year, I'm going to go to Dubai. I go to Saudi Arabia. I get to go to Oslo, Norway. How many jobs
Yeah.
do you get to do that? Not many. Events is amazing. I'm very grateful to to have found it in that sense. But then there are in terms of events, ITC is a really special show, and Ian Pitt, who's the MD of Clarion Events, headhunted me from Reed Exhibitions, and he actually reached out to me directly through LinkedIn. Another reason why you need to develop your LinkedIn profile. I didn't send him a CV. He reached out to me directly. And I'm very grateful to Ian for getting me involved because ITC is a really special show. The team is fantastic. The journey they're on is astronomical. It's the growth. I mean, I can't say the exact growth because it's probably proprietary information, but the show is going from strength to strength, and being able to meet Earth, Wind, and Fire in Vegas as part of your job, being able to meet Gary V, having a chat one on one with Gary V. How many? I think people probably pay tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds to have a 5 minute chat with Gary V. Got it because of my work. Yeah, there are so many things I could talk about, but events, it takes everything from you. It's you need to pour your heart and soul into it. But if you really, manage to, once you're in, you're in. You've got a job for life, as long as you don't, make any enormous errors. But events is a very small world. Everyone knows each other, and I'm grateful for people accepting me. This is the answer to your
Well,
question.
it sounds like you're doing a phenomenal job. I think we'll get to kind of like the final question here, which is, I was going to ask where can people find you, but I guess LinkedIn is the answer on that front. Are there any final kind of calls to action or things that you'd like other people to kind of like interact with you on, or kind of share with you as they kind of reach out as a function of this show?
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning this on the job, and I'm not, someone that wants to be an influencer. I don't want to be, Mr. Beast. But I am experimenting when it comes to social media in a professional sense. How do I put myself out there professionally? So it'd be great if I could just get feedback. What is going to be the future of a professional person that has a personal brand, and how can you leverage that personal brand? I'd love to be one of the people in the event industry to be the one that pushes that boundary and finds that out. So if anyone watches this and they've got any ideas, let me know. I'm all ears.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for making the time, Connor. It's been phenomenal. And we'll wrap it up there.
Pleasure, mate.